Hello, and welcome to the second episode of The Art of Can Season 1. I'd like to introduce or reintroduce our guest today. So, Shalini Menezes, I'd like to maybe start out with a little bit of background, if I can, about you. So, Shal, you were a Fulbright scholar, went on to pursue master's work in biophysics as well as laser and plasma physics at the Ohio State University. You got to get the in there. I've
Yeah,
been
that's right.
told that. So you later went on and studied and received your law degree, studied law, and still are a practicing attorney within the areas of intellectual property, IP. From there, as well as IP valuation. From there, you decided that you were going to go on and get your PhD in finance, focusing on the valuation of patents. You are a successful content creator with a podcast in your own right. You're a mom, your wife, your daughter, and you're even a runner. And as I understand it, you happen to like to race marathons and ultra marathons barefoot. So, wow, you seem to have an incredible relationship with some of the things that most of us struggle with, and that is mastering hard things and even facing and thriving in the face of uncertainty. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you. Shal and I were introduced by a mutual friend a couple months back, and so we've developed, I think, a budding friendship here over time. So normally, Shal, this question is reserved for total strangers, but I'm going to ask you the first question two different ways, and then I'll let you respond. So the first question is, what would happen if you were not here? Or said another way, what should happen or what is happening because you are here?
What is happening because I am here? Couple of things. I am raising two incredibly kind beings, human beings. And I think the world would be short of two amazing, talented, and incredibly kind human beings if I wasn't there. I'm sure someone else would have stepped up to the job, but they're also readers, so I take pleasure in that. And a little bit of art, a little bit of poetry would be missing from the world.
So talk to me a little bit about the importance of how you choose to raise your children and the values and perspectives that you instill, and why is poetry and art so important that it finds its way into the same sentence as raising your children?
I once told my PhD advisor, he was trying to include me in some conversation, political conversation. And I said, here is the Constitution, read it. But I do not want to be part of the argument because at heart, I'm a poet. And I don't know where that came from. I do like poetry. I stopped writing poetry, but I still think that words escape from my fingertips anytime I'm not paying attention. And that's why it found its way in the opening paragraph. I didn't expect it to be, but it did. And what values am I raising my children with? Well, first of all, I'm raising two boys. And you and I will agree that in today's world, raising boys to be good men is just as important as any other occupation you might have. I'm raising readers. I'm raising kids who don't have much smartphone access till the age of 16. I am raising kids who can play two musical instruments each, and can have a conversation on geopolitical affairs as well as memes that are going around in their class. And they're fun to be around, even as people. I find myself seeking their company more and more than I do of people my age. I truly enjoy spending time with them, not just because I'm their mother, but because they're interesting people. So I think that's my contribution, however minuscule it might be, but that's my contribution to the world.
Small things often have big results. We talk a lot about that. Your approach to raising your children, it sounds like, is one of balancing self-awareness, self-confidence, curiosity in the face of a world that is relatively uncertain. How do you square in your own life, as well as the values that you're instilling in your kids, the familiarity with uncertainty, with the essence of who they or you really are? And I think that therein lies a problem with our society, is that many of us have lost touch with the essence of who we really are, because we simply don't pay attention to that.
Let me ask you a question in return. Why do you think we have lost touch with who we are?
I think it's three evolving trends. And again, I don't know, right? So this is my opinion. I think the first trend is we now have a level of immediacy in terms of access to information that we never had before. And I recall many, many years ago in the early mid 90s, meeting with some folks at Apple, the predecessor to this, which was an iPod. And then prior to that, it was this thing called a Newton that was ultimately killed. And in large part, the word was that device was killed. The Newton was killed so it could make way for, the first generation iPhone. And at the time, the phone, when Jobs was asked what he expected of that, and he didn't talk about it as a phone. It was and I wasn't in the room, but I heard this from somebody that was. He called it a mobile decisioning device, and it was the third brain. He wanted it to be the third brain. And you fast forward, and that's where we are. And so I think that the immediacy of information that is available to us, along with our inability to access and process the truth of that information, is the first bucket. We see something and we assume that it's true because we don't have the ability or the time to go and search out the truth, or we're trained not to anymore. It's a habit. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, because of the digital prevalence, we've lost touch with our ability to communicate in an analog way with our neighbors, with even strangers. I said to you that I asked that question to perfect strangers. I did that starting after my accident, and I'll tap people on the shoulder at a gas station or a coffee shop, and I'll ask them a series of questions. And people don't engage with people they don't know anymore. Hell, they don't engage with people they do know anymore. And so I think that habit of flatter or lower fidelity engagement is a problem. And I think the third area is that we have a belief that that success comes in the form of currency. Currency is power, prestige, or money. And if we don't chase currency, power, prestige, or money, or all of them, then we are not successful. And we're willing to forego everything else many times in our life. And because of that, we often will read from a script that says, this is what success looks like. We will play a character in a play that says, I need to do this. I need to act this way. I need to do this. And it doesn't fundamentally align with who you are. And because of the lack of social connections, belief and trust in each other, the perceptions of what is versus what we think is, and our inability to explore our essence and be authentic in who we are, leads us to quite broken place.
Okay. Will we still be friends if I disagree?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I
Tell me.
disagree respectfully and humbly. I will tell you three. Okay, I'll give you three examples of things that are happening currently in my life, which go against everything you have just said. I'm sure that happens. I'm not denying that it doesn't happen to other people, but these are instances in my life. So one is, I have had at least 5 or 6 people from different countries whom I have met over LinkedIn come and visit me, specifically come to visit me in Goa. They have made the time to form the connection with me. And yes, it was on social media, but we took it offline, and they have gone out of their way to come visit me. And
so
we've
just for a point of clarification, so you reside in Goa, India?
Yes. It is about, geographically, it's about 600 kilometers right below Mumbai, southwest of India. And it's a tourist destination for many, but I still have people who come down and visit me in India, in Goa. And it's just touching, and it's humbling, and it's delightful to hear stories of their lives and things that have been happening to them on the same platform where we met, but now we're interacting in real life. I take them to my favorite restaurant. I have them try interesting foods and drinks, and we have a good few hours, and then they depart. So that's one instance. The second is a couple of years ago, I had someone who wanted to create content for me. And the gig lasted about a couple of months. And then I decided that I like writing my own content. But we remained friends. And now I have this very special group of 25 to 30-year-olds who reside in a different state in India, in Bangalore. So my children get to see all of these people. They get to meet people, youngsters or LinkedIn friends from various walks of life. And without me having to say, here is the lesson for you to learn, without being that obvious, I think when they interact with all of these different people from different walks of life and different backgrounds, but who have taken the time to come meet me, I think the children learn something.
That you create an environment for authenticity.
I know no other way, because the alternate is too much work and I'm lazy, tense. And so authenticity is the easier way out. I had a physics professor who used to say physics is for lazy people, because any other branch, you have to study, you have to practice, you have to show up. But in physics, if you understand it in class, you go and give the exam and you go through. It's for lazy people. And I think that's true. Somewhere I'm still lazy.
Well, okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. If you think about physics from the standpoint of learning what is often hidden in the natural world, it's the cause and effects, the rules that govern the things that we see and even the things we don't see. I've also heard from another friend who also has a PhD in physics that he finds physics to be as much about philosophy as it does about science.
That's true. It's absolutely true.
So with that said, perhaps your experience is unique to how you were approaching your life, and knowing who the essence of and a Shal is in an authentic way, creating experiences that are rich and deep because they lack the static or the noise that comes from the other buckets. It seems like there's a lesson there in terms of how to apply or practice, if you will, these simple behaviors to create a rich and fulfilling life, which, not only on paper, but in our discussions that you've been able to paint.
So, okay, I'm going to take you back a few decades now. And I did this exercise when I was in high school, and I had my then best friend go around class and collect feedback on me. And unanimously, I was told that I was boring. And I was not someone they would choose to chat with or talk to or spend time with. And I said, okay. So many years later, they still have a WhatsApp group. I still am not a part of the WhatsApp group because it's just doesn't make sense. But unconsciously or subconsciously, I don't know what's the right word here, everything I do has been something to alleviate that uninteresting part. Like, how do I go from being uninteresting Shalini to being interesting Shalini? And I realized along the way, I'm still a nerd. Nothing has changed since then. But I was very much a nerd when I was in ninth grade, and I still am, just about different things. But now I'm having fun. And so if you're truly enjoying what you're doing, and everything you look at as a learning experience, and everything you look at is, okay, that's going to add another facet to me. So I learned how to bake. I learned how to be a barista. I sometimes go and cook lasagna at my friend's cafe for a Saturday meal. It's all subconsciously to make me more interesting. But I don't care about that anymore. Now it's more about, am I having fun or not?
Has that become baked into who you are?
Yes. Without realizing it, I make decisions or I choose things that adds to that. Right. So for those who are not into any kind of running or cycling or anything, DNS did not start, which is what you get if you don't start your race. And if you start and don't finish, you get a DNF, which is a did not finish. I was an avid runner, and somewhere along the way, things happened in my personal life which had a direct impact on my running, not physically, but mentally. I want to say I gave up on running, but that's not true. I think running gave up on me for some time. We took a break. And I've tried over the past few years to go back to running. I kept trying to go back and it wouldn't start. I went back to the first program I started, which is a couch to 5K. I did that few times, reached 5K, but never progressed. And it's always bothered me. It's always rankled me that I am not running the way I used to. And so over the years, I also ended up gathering quite a few DNS. And like I told you in the promo, there are quite a few. I can list all the DNSs that I had. And I can tell you what I was thinking at the time that I did not start or I did not show up. My mind actually even helped with that. It even gave me a beautiful dream with my favorite author visiting me in Goa. And, I skipped the race to go meet him and I was dreaming all about this and I didn't show up for the race. And of course, the author was not in Goa. So DNS it bothers me. And a couple of months ago, I was defending my PhD thesis.
That I want to come back to that. But what would have happened if you had accepted the DNSs, did not start, and said, I can't do this? And you decided that you couldn't do it because of fill in the blank. I don't have the ability. I no longer am in shape. Mentally, I'm not there. It doesn't matter, right? There's some reason that moves you into I guess maybe a place of victimhood because this is happening, right? But irrespective of that, if that acceptance of the inability or the can't had taken root in you, and you fast forward now to the dissertation, so finish your story and then the follow-up do you think anything would have changed?
Okay. Definitely it would have changed. It would have changed. I'll tell you why. So there was this particular slide in my presentation, which my advisor, all the way during the preparation, he was like, this is the main slide. Make sure you do this. Make sure you present it. And of course, when that slide popped up, and of course, I changed everything the night before. The night before the presentation, I ended up changing everything on the slide. So much so that when it popped up the next morning, I did not recognize it because I had changed the colors. I had changed the notation. I don't know why I did that. It made sense to me the night before. And I froze and I looked at the slide. I looked at the people and I wanted to say, I cannot go ahead with this. I mean, in my head, in that it was a very brief pause, a couple of seconds maybe, but it was playing all these scenarios out. What would happen if I quit now? I will not get a PhD. Okay, what would happen if I was running a marathon and I stopped halfway? And then I realized that if I was running a marathon and I stopped halfway, or even I stopped at the 30-kilometer mark, I would take a breath, get rid of the stitch that's bothering me, drink some water, splash some ice water on my face from one of the stalls and aid stations. And then I would pick myself up and finish the race because there was no way once I started, I'm going to get a DNF unless I have a medical emergency. Mm-hmm. And so I reminded myself of that. I had a sip of water. I cleared my throat. I said, okay, we're going to come back to this slide if you have any questions. And I went ahead. And I came back because they had a couple of questions. And then, we completed the presentation. And they realized that I froze, but I would have stopped. If it was a marathon, I would have stopped. Who doesn't stop in a 42-kilometer race unless you're Usain Bolt or Mo, right? So I did stop, but I gathered myself, had a sip of water at the aid station and continued. So that was that. And I think a DNS is unacceptable unless it's a medical emergency. And so is a DNF. And that is why I think it's a feedback loop where this aspect of my life, the academic aspect of my life, and the pursuit of running, both of these, they feed themselves, they feed each other. And so I leaned on the marathon part of my life to get through my PhD. And now I'm getting back into running, leaning on the PhD, saying, if I could do that, I can do this.
So you did the unimaginable for most and a clutch situation. You'd spent 10 years preparing for your PhD ultimately?
Now, the PhD itself was start to finish was 5 years, but it's been a dream of mine for the last 30 years.
Okay. So you just didn't wake up and 5 years ago go, I'm going to do this.
No. I have wanted to do it since I was 15 or 16.
Okay. All right. So this is a lifelong dream, and you spent 5 years of exceedingly focused hard work to get into a room with a group of subject matter experts, stand in front of them to defend your dissertation, right? Defend your work. And a question is asked from the people that are going to give you that you don't know the answer. What kind of courage did that take to say that? And ultimately, what happened?
It takes a different level of humility and masochism to do a PhD and then stand in front of a room full of subject matter experts and say, I don't know, especially when you're going to get a degree that is the pinnacle of your educational journey. But before that, you have to eat humble pie. But I was ready for it. I was mentally okay with it. It was a part of my journey, and I had fully accepted it going in that there will be something I do not know. And all I have to do is say, I do not know, but can I study it further and get back to you on this? And that's what I did for some of the questions, that this was not something that I thought about, but can I look it up and maybe we can co-author a paper together on this once I know more about this topic.
So what happened? You didn't walk out of the room without a happy ending.
No,
What
no, no.
happened?
They liked the fact that I defended, for whatever my background was, that I defended that very well. And what I didn't know, I accepted that I didn't know rather than try and make stories on the spot. It was definitely not a competition for that. So they were okay with it, that I didn't know some things, because they're teachers and their job was to make sure the student knows what he or she doesn't know. So they were okay with
Yeah,
it. They
but
were
they did.
good people.
From what I recall, they did something else at the end.
Yes, I did get feedback and I did get a good ovation for how I had fielded the questions. They were really happy with that. So
So you're
while I thought I messed up on the presentation, but I did get good feedback on how I answered all the questions.
so to summarize that, you received by being authentic and admitting an area that you were deficient and then leaning into it by saying, hey, I want to improve this. Here's what we can do. In the end, rather than being penalized for it, you were rewarded not only with your PhD, but you received a round of applause from those that were judging you.
Yes. But I think that is the most PhDs end like that. Most defense presentations end like that, I would like to think. I do not think they go, unless you really, really mess up on your data or your why. Your why is important.
Yeah, but you take it back to running, and if you think about being prepared,
Okay.
you've done your training, you're properly equipped, you come into it, but at some point something occurs, it's unexpected, and you begin to question your ability. And if you're not comfortable with the uncertainty, you're not familiar with the unfamiliar, you don't have an experience of doing certain hard things, especially if you're not familiar with the essence of who you really are, then it becomes okay.
Quitting is not an option. Quitting.
It shouldn't be, but I think in many respects it is. And I'll give you an example. Remember, I started this with two questions.
Yes.
What would happen if you weren't here, and what should happen because you are here? There's a third question.
Okay.
And so I asked these questions to strangers, and I've asked somewhere between 350 and 400 people this question now. And roughly 12% of them can give a good answer to what should or is happening because you are here. And then the follow-up question is, what scares you? And 12% of those people that can answer the second question, here's what I'm doing, no different than what you just did. People coming to visit you, people having genuine experience, stopping running, starting again, even starting over running. Right? The last time we talked, you just finished, I think, 2 miles, right?
Yeah, 2 miles, yeah.
And then saying, I don't know, in front of subject matter experts in the process of defending your dissertation. All of those things are very difficult. And I think if you're not properly equipped, would break some. And so the 12% of the people that are not scared of anything, and I've had people that I say, what are you scared of? And they will tell me nothing. And let me give you 2 examples. One individual was a guy I met at a gas station. We're talking over pumping gas. And I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? And he said, sure. And so we went through that. And so I said, what should be happening because you are here? And he stammered around. He couldn't answer the question. And he said, I've never really thought of that. And I said, okay, well, let me throw in curveball at you. What's the hardest thing you've ever done? And he went, well, that's easy. And I said, okay, well, what was it? And he said, 10 months ago, I lost my job, and it took me 6 months to find a new one. And in that period of time between losing my job and not being able to find a new one, I lost all belief and trust in who I was because nobody would hire me. And I said, so where did you end up getting a job? And he said, well, turns out that a friend of a friend has a company, and I was given an opportunity there. But at that point, I had pretty much all but given up. And I said, well, why had you all but given up? And he said, because we were about out of money. And I said, well, okay, do you mind me asking what that means? And he said, well, we only had about 2 months left in savings. And that was terrifying to me. And I said, well, when you were looking for a job, he said, well, my wife doesn't work. And I said, I was looking for a job full time. And I said, did you think about maybe doing anything to augment your income? Maybe a job on the weekends, maybe. And he goes, oh, no. I can't drive an Uber, or I couldn't work in a hardware store. That's it. What if I saw somebody that I knew? I went, okay. So the hardest thing you ever did was that you lost your job, and you were 2 months away from running out of me, but you found a job. I said, what scares you? And he immediately responded, losing this job, without hesitation. So he's a lot like the 88%, right? Because the thing that troubled me was he couldn't answer the question of what should be happening because you are here. What are you doing that is unique and different, that is the essence of you, that builds not only your character, your curiosity, but impacts others around you in a positive way, like you've talked about. But on the other half, inside that 12%, there was another guy. And I met this guy in an airport at a Starbucks in line, and I asked him the same questions. And he said, well, the reason that I'm here is to share a very specific message of hope and perseverance. And he said, I do that as a hobby, and I'm working on a book about it. And I said, oh, really? Why? He said, because I had something bad happen to me. And I said, okay, well, then let me throw the curveball at you. What's the hardest thing you ever did? He goes, I used to think it's one thing, but now I realize it's something else. And I said, okay, do tell. And he said, 2 years ago, my 12-year-old daughter was asked out on a date. And she's too young to go out on a date, and she wanted to go to a movie, and I just said no. And my wife thought that I was nuts, and she told me that I was being ridiculous. And then I just told her, no, you're not doing this, in the 5th grade. And the last thing I said to her and my wife as they left to drive her to school was, you'll go on a date over my dead body. And he said, a short time later, they were hit by a dump truck and killed. And I said, that's a hard thing. And he said, no, the hard thing, as bad as that was learning to live again and forgive myself. And he said, and so I had to face that uncertainty and overcome that by not blaming myself for what happened, because there was no way I could have known that. And then start living again in a meaningful, purposeful, intentional way. He said, which I now do. I said, so what scares you? And without hesitation, he said, nothing. And I think therein lies the difference, because a lot of people who don't know who they are, they get wrapped up in social media, about what they don't have and others do or appear to do. And they lack the willingness to have meaningful analog conversations and even be vulnerable. And when somebody says, how you doing? And say, maybe I'm not okay, and have that discussion. The net result of that is hopelessness and victimhood versus creation of a very rich and rewarding reality, which is, I think, where you reside. You reside in not only a different culture than many, being in Goa, that might listen to this, that live in Seattle, may or may not understand, but your reality that you've created for yourself, or co-created along with the universe, is radically different and probably a lot more rewarding. But to bring that to conclusion, it doesn't have to be the way I described. It can be the way you described. And I think that's why having you here is so important and powerful.
I am going to tell you something. So the running and the marathons and the PhD defense, that's not even nowhere in the top 10 of the hardest things I have ever done. That's nowhere close to it. I mean, yes, the PhD was a big deal because I've been wanting it for so long, but that's nowhere close to any of the hardest things I've ever done. And I'll tell you that because I think people should, I mean, if you want something, right, you should go for it. So I had my first career as a physics instructor, physics teacher in the US. I worked at several institutes. I was a TA at the Ohio State University, and then I taught at Brooks Institute of Photography in Ventura, Santa Barbara, and then I was also physics instructor at Lake Tahoe Community College. And I quit all of that because I wanted to study intellectual property law. And I came back to a tiny hamlet in India, in West Bengal. And it houses one of India's premier institutes, technical institutes. So I got into a residency program. I was nearly 30 at this time. And, as per my family, I had reached my expiration date to be married and have kids. But I had a boyfriend and I was going to get married to him. I had blinders on and earplugs. And so I got into the program and I was doing great and I was having a great time learning and being on campus. And then halfway through that, my then boyfriend got a job that he liked and he said, okay, you know what? Let's get married. So I told him, okay, you can come down, we can get married, but I'm going to stay here on campus for another year and a half until I finish. And he's pretty chill. So he said, yeah, okay, fine. That works for me. But, let's do this so pressure is off you and, people stop hounding you. I said, okay, fine. So he came down, we got married. And now this is a bit too much information for your show, perhaps, but he left. And as soon as he left, I realized I was pregnant. So I asked him, what do you want to do? He said, whatever you decide is fine by me. And I said, I'm going to keep the baby. And he never questioned me. He didn't ask, are you going to quit or what? Nothing. He was like, okay, fine. And everyone else asked me, yeah, are you going to quit school now? Because I still had a year to go. And they said, are you going to quit? I said, no, I'm not going to quit. How are you going to manage the baby? I said, I don't know. I've never had a baby before. Let's figure it out. Okay. Let's see how things go. So I attended one whole semester pregnant and swollen ankles and throwing up and morning sickness and all that fun stuff while living in a hostel, while living in a shared dormitory kind of place. And the people who lived, the girls who were there in the girls' hostel were really supportive. But the entire institution, which has been around since 1951, has never seen a pregnant student on campus. They did not know what to do with me. I wanted to take a semester off, have the baby and come back, do the 6th semester and then do the 5th semester. It was a bit complicated. They did not know what to do with me. I asked for campus housing when the baby is born. They said, no, it's not a traditional family unit. We cannot give you campus housing. I said, can I do semester 5 after semester 6? Because there's no subjects that are carrying forward. And they said, we don't know. I said, what is a traditional family unit? They said, if the male is studying and the wife has a baby, yes, but wife has a baby and there's no husband in sight and no one else, we don't know what to do with you. I managed to allow them to let me take semester 5 after semester 6. So I took semester 5 off, had the baby in Bombay, came back to campus with a 2-month-old baby, didn't get campus housing because I was not a traditional family unit, took an apartment outside campus, and now I had a 2-month-old baby at home, right? So I asked my teachers if they can extend the break between classes from 15 minutes to 20 minutes or 25 minutes. And they graciously agreed. So I would cycle back and forth 8 kilometers each way, reach class, attend 1.5 hour class, come back home in time to feed the baby, rush back in that 20-minute window, attend the next class, come back home, have lunch, feed the baby, go back for the second round of classes. And I did that for 6 months. And the cycling back and forth was great, of course. But I had support. But if you ask me, I was alone because my husband was in the US at that time. And it took a lot of willpower and grit because, there are all these hormones coursing through your body. You have now a creature that you're responsible for in your arms, but you also have this responsibility that you've undertaken academically. Law school is that particular law school where we had, in addition to all the law subjects, we had one intellectual property related subject each semester. We deep dived into it. So it was a lot for me to handle, but I think I came out of it stronger. And I think I would rate that in one of the more difficult things that I have endured than the.
So, and what did that hard thing teach you? And would you trade it for not having done it?
I would not trade it for anything in the world. I would not trade it because I have a story to tell whenever anyone asks me about law school. I dare you to ask anyone about law school and have them come up with a fun story like this, where I would smuggle a 2-month-old baby boy into the girls' hall because we ran out of electricity outside in the village and I needed internet to do my homework, and I would snuggle this baby into the hostel and spend the night there in my room. I still had a room in the hostel, and I would spend the night there working, and then next morning take the baby back, drop him at home, and then attend classes. So I would not trade that story or that experience for anything in the world.
Do you, when you encounter hard things today, is that body of knowledge something that you go back to and rely on to remind yourself the essence of who you are, as well as what you're capable of?
Definitely. If one of my favorite people on LinkedIn is Paul Watkins, and Paul says you should do difficult things on a regular basis, and because you've done them, you will manage to do something else because you've done this difficult thing. And it ties back in with what I was saying earlier about I lean onto my running stories, running experience to get through my academic difficulties. And I lean on to my academic achievements, or even such things where where I fought institutional bureaucracy and just everything else to get to raise the baby. And then of course I went back to the US and spent time there before coming back to India. But I just got through that difficult period, 1.5 years. So interchangeably, I lean on one or the other to excel in the other, or to even get through the other. So it helps having to do difficult things.
I had a conversation with an acquaintance the other day, and over the past couple of years, this acquaintance has soured. And I asked this acquaintance, "Do you like what you do?" And this person said, "I hate it. I hate everything about it." And I said, "Well, why? Why do you hate it?" And there's a litany of stuff that happens to this person. Some of them do happen, and they have very little control over it except how they respond to it. But some of it, I think, is a function of the emotional state and the cloud that they've allowed to settle in on them. And I said, "You could change some of these things, you know." And he said, "I can't." And I said, "Well, if you ask for forgiveness rather than permission within the area that you do know, what's the worst thing that can happen to you?" Then this litany of all of these bad things that could occur spill out. And in this person's mind, these are realities. And I said, if it's so bad where you are, then leave. Find a new job or a new avocation, do something different. I can't. I'm trapped in this. Why? No good answer. And so the mindset of misery is rooted in can't, and can't means won't. And sometimes there are good reasons for won't. I could use some extra money. If I burn my house down, I could cash in on the insurance policy, right? I won't do that, right? But in that instance, there's a good reason for won't. But more often than not, that most people don't realize that won't is where they are. Won't is a state of being, and it's limiting and finite. They have no clue that that's where they are. They operate in this victim mindset where everything is happening to them. And they look on social and they see other people that appear to be happier. They're not communicating with anybody really. And as an example, this individual I know who's become more and more bitter over time has retracted from his friend and associates group. So they move inward, and that inward place is uglier and uglier, and they find themselves quite literally trapped. The last thing I said to this person, I said, "What are you going to do?" And he said, "I'm going to stay where I am through the rest of my career, probably another 10, 15 years. And afterwards, if I live that long, I'll be able to do something else." And I said, "Yeah, but you'll be 70 something years old, and you'll be tired and broken, and that's no way to live." And his response is, "I don't think I have any other choice." And I think, Shal, that people find themselves trapped somewhere between this person and the state of being that you're articulating. And it over time can go one way or the other. The question is, do they have hope, belief, and a roadmap is to find your way rather than finding the way of this acquaintance?
There is a way, right? There is always a way.
Yeah, there always is.
It's just that it's comfortable to stay in that little zone of self-pity. Drowning in self-pity, I always like to say, just like when you drown in water, your fingers get numb and pruny. Drowning in self-pity makes your brain pruny. And it's comforting. But to step out of that comfort zone and do something uncomfortable is, and what will people say? You talked about that. What will people say? I went and trained as a barista after 2 master's degrees. And that was a question my friends asked me. Why are you training as a barista? I said, I'm looking for a job as a physics instructor. But while I'm doing that, let me do something that, I've always been a coffee snob. Let me add some credibility to that snobbishness. Let me now back that up with knowledge. And I got laughed at. I got ridiculed for that. It doesn't matter. And I even had customers come and laugh at me because they would I don't know where these people came from. They were trying to one up a barista. And I asked this customer, I remember, I asked him, "So would that be all, sir? Can I get you anything else?" And he goes, "What is the answer to life?" And I wasn't thinking. It was middle of the night. It was a night shift in an airport coffee shop. And I said, 42. And he goes, "How does a barista know about that?" And I go, I probably am more qualified than you are at this point. And he goes, "That's not possible." And I said, "I do have 2 master's degrees in physics." And he goes, "I'll just take my coffee and go away from here now." And and he got very upset because I knew 42 and he was I don't know what he was trying to do. So yes.
What's the significance of 42?
It's from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the computer, So I tell my kids the same thing. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. If you don't start taking your own decisions, then someone else is going to decide for you. And if you're okay with that, you're going to be living here. And that's the fear I put in them, that you're going to be 35 and I'm going to be driving you everywhere because you don't have a license and you are not, because you're not taking your own decisions and putting your clothes away. So do you want to be there? They go, "There's no way I'm 35 and I don't have a driver's license." And I go, I'm just giving you the alternate scenario to what you're doing right now. And I get eye rolls and the typical teenage reactions, but they also then step out and go do their thing.
You spend a lot of time in the uncomfortable and in the uncertain. How comfortable are you with the uncertainty? And is there any piece of advice that you would want to offer those that are scared to follow in your footsteps?
Well, step 1, don't follow in my footsteps. Make your own path, because it's going to be very different from mine, but it's going to be just as beautiful, I promise you. Second, cliched as it might sound, embrace the uncertainty, because that's where fun lies, that's where adventure lies, that's where growth lies. And you can do everything you want to do. I promise you can do everything you want to do. Except, of course, I cannot say I want to be Miss America because that's not going to happen. But, within limits, within where I am right now and within all the possibilities that are open to me, all the paths that are open to me, my opportunities are unlimited, and the same goes for you.
Do you believe in probability?
In what way?
Well, this the standpoint of that there is an equal likelihood that one thing might happen as well as another. You flip a coin and the probability of heads coming up and tails coming up. So the probability of something good happening out of the uncertainty is equal to the probability of something bad happening.
Initially, yes, But as you keep adding more of these learning blocks, probability of something good happening is going to increase. Initially, it may seem like an equal probability or that it's leaning towards bad things happening. But as you add these blocks, it's going to lean one way more than the other. And yes, there is a good side, there is a bad side. You come out with fun or you come out with a fun and a lesson. And it's win-win in my book. It's win-win.
So these blocks that you build over time literally can shape your reality.
Yes.
Shalini, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Steve. This was a fun conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.